Good morning, Perry Marshall here, and we have a little bit of a different kind of webinar today. We are going to talk about hiring, and I got a couple of special guests here today. I have Nancy Slessenger. She has hired people for us. She has hired people for a whole bunch of Planet Perry members, and I've used her company's definitive selling proposition in a bunch of different newsletters and examples because they guarantee the success of a candidate rather than just making hand-waving promises. And that requires a considerable amount of acumen to pull off because hiring is expensive. And hiring the wrong person is a huge mistake, and we're going to talk about that. People generally don't realize how big of a mistake a bad hire is. We also have Brady Roberts, who's going to have quite a bit to talk about. Brady is a member of our Advanced Mastery Network, and which is my highest level training group. And Brady owns a company called iCapture and also has his fingers in several other interesting pies. And just the other day, Brady made a really interesting comment about hiring, which I'll let him tell those stories, but this is really important. You've come to the right place. This is something that all of you need to do right. And if you do it right, it will be considerably easier to get your companies to do what you want your companies to do, which is like make money, make sales, be organized, not chew up all of your time and all that kind of stuff. A lot of it depends on how good your staff is, how good your team is. So Nancy Slessenger, I'm going to turn off my camera and turn it over to you guys. I'll pop in every now and then probably, but you guys take it away.
Thanks, Perry. I'm just going to confess right now that I asked Brady along because we had a little email chat about hiring, and he made a comment about the cost of getting it wrong. And actually, we do have this 12-month guarantee, and Brady was one of the people we let down in that one of his people left after 11 months, didn't they, that we hired for you, Brady? And we did replace her, didn't we? So I will just come clean.
You did replace them, and the replacement is now my #1 guy, and very, very thankful for that.
But that's proof that you have skin in the game, Nancy. So.
Yeah. So I want to be honest about that one. So what we're going to do is just go through some key things to do when you're hiring to avoid costly mistakes. So let's just dive straight in, and please just ask questions at any stage if you want to, and we'll answer them. And I'm sure Brady will be more than happy to pitch in. So 5 key mistakes. We'll go through these one by one, but this is the overview. So not being clear what you really need, writing an ad that shuts your campaign down, using resumes to make your decisions, not using application forms, and asking really bad questions. So let's start off then with the not being clear on what you really want. I often hear people talking about A players, getting an A player, when they don't really know what they want. They just want this A player. Have you got any thoughts on that, Brady, before I say anything?
Oh my goodness, this is like the whole A player thing. Look, I want A players too.
Yeah.
But what it took me a while to realize is that I am really, really crummy at identifying A players, and I am so biased in what I'm looking for that I'm a terrible judge of character. I'm a terrible judge of skills, and I don't know, about most of the rest of you in Perry's world, but I am very optimistic, and being optimistic in the frame of recruiting is perhaps the most damaging or prohibitive characteristic to have going in.
And sales and marketing people are particularly susceptible to this.
Yeah.
Because we like people, we believe in people, and we're optimistic, and that is pretty much the opposite It's like you have to be a purchasing agent, which is almost the opposite. So back to you guys.
Yeah. So here are the key things that I think we really need to be careful about. The first one is it can be really hard to define what you really need, especially if you're a growing company and this is a new position that you've never hired anyone for before. How do you know what the job's really going to be? So there's sometimes there isn't an actually right answer, but there's a kind of 80–90% answer there. But you really need to put some effort in thinking, what do I need this person to be able to do? What a lot of our clients do is instead of that, they say, oh, well, we want a person who's like this, who's like really nice to work with, who's got all these skills and who's got these bits of experience. But they don't say, this is what I need this person to be able to do, or here's what I want them to have done by the end of the year. And that's much more what you need to think. The next thing is,
Nancy, on that point, you know, I know the most valuable piece of when I, you know, work with you on the roles that you've helped us hire for. The most valuable piece has always been in how good you are at asking me the right questions to get this information out and onto paper. Because what people don't realize is, right, you're seeing it through your own lens, and you are just a genius at asking me the right question to tease out the details that need to go into the job descriptions and all of that. And so that's a huge component of success.
Oh, thanks for that, Brady. I mean, it's not just asking the right questions, actually. It's also sometimes people have quite a narrow view of what the person could do for them. And I mean, I was talking to someone just recently about a role, and they wanted someone who could just cope with lots of things changing all the time and take phone calls at the weekends and do things at the drop of the hat in the middle of the night and so on. And I said, well, would it not be a good idea to get someone who was so well organized, they just never had to do that? And there was this sort of silence because it hadn't really occurred to this person that there were people around like that. And that's one of the key things about doing this. If you're just sat in your own little bubble, you know, your own little echo chamber, then you just have this very fixed idea of what's available. I mean, we've had other issues where people have done their best to work out what was involved in the role, but when it's actually come down to it, they haven't got it right. So we had one client who had someone who, they got this job and they thought it was 70% dealing with clients and 30% doing all the admin, and it turned out to be the other way around. And the candidate, really the bit they wanted to do was the bit dealing with clients. And so when they found out that actually only 30% of the job was dealing with clients, they left and we had to replace them. Now, I don't know whether realistically they would have been able to get that bit right, because it's quite a difficult thing to get it right when you've never had someone doing that job. But what I often do is get clients to just spend some time. You can do this quite easily. If you're hiring someone to do part of what you do, which I think is quite often the case for entrepreneurs, because, you know, we start off doing everything and then we start hiving off bits of it. Would you say that was right, Brady? I mean, that's kind of, you know, the way.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's the, you know, I want to get everything off my plate I don't like doing.
Yeah,
right.
So it's really useful to just spend some time monitoring what you really spend your time doing, because I can guarantee you it is not in the proportions you think it is. It just never is. I mean, I used to do that when I was a student, working out where all my money went. And I discovered that a lot of my money went on these really nice cream cakes in this shop that I used to pass on my way back to my house every evening. And when I added it up, it was like, oh my God. And, you know, to this day, I can hardly eat a cream cake because of that, because it was such a shock to see how much money, what a big proportion of my income went on that. But I guarantee you, the time you think you spend on stuff is very unlikely to be what you really think it is. But if you can spend some time doing that, that will not only help you to work out what a new person needs to do, but it might help you to prioritize what you actually need to recruit for anyway. So that's a key thing to do, and to really not just sit on your own thinking about it, but to talk to someone else and start thinking, in a year's time, if I'd got this person, what would be different? What would they have achieved? And then focus on getting someone who can do that. And once you've kind of got that idea, ask other people who've hired into similar roles. because they'll say, oh yeah, you know, this has been useful, actually that wasn't so good, or whatever, and that can really help you to think your thought processes through. Any other thoughts on that, Brady?
Nancy,
well, yeah.
Brian. Go, I'm here.
Brian?
I'm off camera. I apologize for that. Brian Todd here. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Brian.
Just one thing to add to your second to last bullet point. Also, ask yourself how you would know if this person had failed.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
A little via negativa there, because it's true of marketing campaigns. How will we know if this did not work? And it's true of hires as well.
So thanks for our natural pessimist balancing out the optimism here, Brian.
Yes.
I call it via negativa. It's very important.
Thank you.
So Nancy, when I look at this, you know, I think what was crucial, I know when we engaged at the beginning, having some vision of what you're like, putting together an organizational chart. And understanding all, like, there are just some basic roles, no matter what kind of company you are, there are some basic roles that every company has to fill. And you know, if you're running solo or just have one or two people, there's a lot of people wearing a lot of hats. But if you really drew out the org chart, you might have 10, 15 seats in that org chart, and everybody's wearing 5 hats. And you really have to, I think, as you're defining these roles, be aware of where you're going in the future. What is it that you want to, you know, end up as? And I think, Nancy, when we first engaged, you know, we were doing about $1 million in sales. And you know what you brought to the table, and Nancy's hired multiple people for me. It was absolutely the key for us to go from 1 million to 5 million was the people component. There was no other single factor that probably played in as much.
All right, well, let's move on to our next slide. So once you've identified what it is you're looking for, one of the things you're going to want to do is write an ad. And I'm just throwing this one in here about being careful about how you write your ads. We have had several occasions when ads have just been shut down, and also our whole account with a job site has been shut down. And it's a bit like a Google slap, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Sometimes you have no idea why they've done it. Other times you do. But job sites, particularly Indeed now, have algorithms and things that check your ads, and they are changing all the time. Now, we had a client very recently who had an ad that actually I thought was really good, that he'd used. He hadn't managed to get the person he wanted, which is why he'd come to us, but he got this ad. So I thought, well, we'll just tweak this and update it a bit, but it looked like a really good ad, and it got shut down. So it was fine, but you know, a year ago, and now it wasn't. And one of the reasons for that was because it looked as though, or you could interpret it as though, he was expecting people to pay for their own training. Now, if you read it properly, it didn't say that at all, but the algorithm saw things in there that meant it thought that was what was happening. We had another guy who was asking people to hire people into a sales department, and the algorithm thought he was running a multi-level marketing company, and they don't like that. So that got shut down. And then, of course, we had one that Brian wrote, didn't you, Brian?
Yes.
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 Which shut down our entire whole account, basically, because they got complaints about it.
I must admit I took that as a compliment. And what I will say is that, Nancy, you were the first person I've ever worked with who actively encouraged us to write the most straightforward, direct, thorough, and honest ads that we could.
Yeah. Because
of the culture of our company here and the roles that we're going to be filling. And I think it kind of goes with the territory that the better a job we do of that, the more on some platforms it's going to put us at risk.
Yeah. So I think with that one, there were some ways, again, that some people who I think didn't read it properly seemed to think you wanted something for nothing. I mean, we had other people who thought it was great. But the difficulty is that if you're trying to advertise for a job, you don't really want your ad to be shut down. So when I spent quite some time talking to my colleague Donna about this, and this is a really hard thing to get right. And we had another one I put at the bottom, people don't like expletives, and they've got a very loose interpretation of expletives, you know, really basic things that I wouldn't regard as rude or offensive. Just don't put them in ads at all. Don't even use asterisks in there because it's really just not worth it. So if you want to avoid this, read through the policy. And we use various different platforms, and you know, we look carefully at their policy. Some companies won't let you advertise in certain areas, like tobacco industry, for example. We hired someone for that industry a while back, so we couldn't use that platform. But the other thing is to have a range of places where you're advertising. Don't just have all your eggs in one basket. I think that's really the key, because once your ad's been closed down, it can take you a couple of weeks to get things back up again, if you ever do get them back up again. And obviously you've lost a lot of time doing that. So it's just a word of warning. These things are changing all the time. So an ad that was okay last year or a few months ago may not be okay now. And do stick to the kind of format they're asking for. So put the salary in the salary area, put the package at the top in that area. But be, as Brian says, really, really honest and open about exactly what's involved in the job. We actually had, in fact, if I can, oh, I haven't got it, I can't get onto it because I've got this on my screen at the moment, but we had some really nice feedback from a couple of candidates recently saying how much they liked our process, because they really liked the questions, which I'm going to come to, and because everything was so clear and it was really obvious what the job entailed, and that wasn't always the case in a lot of situations. So I think that's just worth bearing in mind. Okay, well, let's see if we can get on to our next mistake.
So Nancy, Nancy,
yeah.
before we jump to that, I'd love to just say, like, you know, we are, you know, what we found from working with you is that you're really good at creating this attract and repel mechanism. And so and it's the entire process, not just the ad, but the entire process either attracts people or it repels people. And that is such a key function to, you know, not getting the wrong people, attracting the right people, but then you want the right people to have every indication that they're in the right place.
Exactly.
And it really is, I mean, hiring is so much about the process and how you do it, because you have to create momentum with your candidates. And that momentum starts with the ad that they see. And then it's their first interaction with you. And I think that's what you really brought to us, was that process, so that the good candidates stick, because they immediately identify with how we're doing things, and it's done in a professional way.
Well, I have to say, oh, go on, Brian, sorry.
I'll add to that. I have had so much fun over the years writing ads that give you a taste for what it's like to work with Perry. That is so much fun, because there is definitely an attract repel thing going on there.
Yeah, because I think that the key thing, and I think it was quite easy with you, Brady, was getting you to write something in your own words about your company and why you'd started it and what you're there to do. And to me, that is really important, because that gives the candidate a flavour of the company, and it gives them a sort of, I'd really like to work with this guy, or, oh, I don't really fancy working with this guy feeling. And we don't want the people who don't want to work with you. We don't want to waste their time or your time. So that is really important. And I think especially when you're an entrepreneur and it's your own business, the business is so much part of you that you need to get your personality in there. And that's, you only need like a paragraph or two saying, you know, I started this company. I mean, we had one company recently, the guy started the company because he was fed up with how badly other people did what he does. And that gives it a really interesting and different flavour for candidates to see and to think, actually, yeah, you're right. I don't like the way other people do this, and I'd like to do it better. And so on. So yeah, really, really important bit. Thank you. So then we've got resumes. This is one of my biggest bugbears, resumes. And I put a little quote here from one of our clients in Australia. They are accountants for veterinarians. So it's quite a niche market. And when we started working with them, this was what Paolo said, because it had never really occurred to him to do anything other than sort through resumes and CVs when he was looking for candidates. But if you've ever done that, and I imagine a lot of people, if you've ever hired anyone, will have done that, and it's really hard. You have, Brady.
I've done it. I'm incredibly guilty of doing this. Yes.
Yeah, but you know, why would you do any different? Because that's what you think you're supposed to do, isn't it? So, you know, fair enough. So let's just, I mean, what problems did you have when you were trying to sort candidates using resumes?
Well, it's prejudging, and you know, look, I think there's some value to glancing at a resume, but I think what I learned from you is get some other perspective first and then glance at it. And that, you know, it really comes down to the person's ability to communicate in most cases. And a resume, right, they could have had their, you know, father-in-law or whatever who's really good at a resume make their resume, and then they can't do squat. And on the flip side, they may not know how to do a resume, but they have all the answers and all the skills and the communication, you know, assets that you're looking for.
Yeah, and that's really the key thing. I mean, there is a correlation, obviously, a rough correlation between resumes and how well people can do the job, but it isn't that good. I worked with a guy. Resumes
contain a huge, a tiny amount of important signal and a huge amount of noise.
Yeah.
So you have to know which is which. But go ahead.
I think the biggest problem to me is that some really good candidates are really bad at designing a resume and knowing what to put into it. And so you are risking missing really, really good candidates if you purely sort using resumes. I worked with a guy who wanted to leave his company. He's a client of mine, and he worked for a very, very big global pharmaceutical company. He was their software architect, absolutely amazing guy. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll help you with this. Send me what you've got. It's just awful. It was 4 or 5 pages, A4 pages of closely typed, really tiny font, no gaps in between, in sort of different panels. And I kind of went through this, and I started asking him about the different things. And I said, well, what was this for? How did this help your employer? And so on. And I came to this one thing. I said, well, what was this? Well, he'd come up with this idea to redesign some really key aspects of their software architecture. And I said, well, what was the benefit to the company? He said, oh, well, I thought it would save them £6 million. And I was like, oh, okay. So did you do it? Yes. How much did it save? It saved £6 million. Well, it turned out it saved £6 million a year for 10 years so far. And I said to him, well, Pete, where does it say on your resume it saved company £60 million? Because I can guarantee you, anyone who sees that coming onto their desk, probably whatever the job is going to want to see you. Oh, I didn't really think that would. Oh, God. That is not untypical. People have done great stuff. It's nowhere on their resume, nowhere on their CV. So it's kind of more that side of the problem, in my view, than the other way around. I also would say that people at the top end quite often get other people to write their resumes. I've written people's resumes for them. I can almost guarantee someone gets an interview because I just know what to put in a resume. But probably the person I'm working with, you know, they may not be the best candidate by quite a long way. I don't know. But be really careful about that. So
Nancy, that's a great illustration of burying the lead. Before you move on, I'll just mention our friend Alan Carniol is on, and he says,
oh, hello, Alan.
I have never looked at a resume for a person I've hired. I just use the skills assessment-based process that Nancy suggests, and that includes hiring staff for my firm and a nanny for my daughter. It works.
Oh, thanks, Alan. That's really encouraging to hear. So let's look at this next mistake then, which is not using application forms. So application forms, I know this is going to sound really tedious and everyone's probably just nodding off at this point. The key thing here is that an application form is a really, really good way of filtering your candidates. It's much quicker, it's much more effective, but you have to design a good application form. So Brady was talking earlier about sort of getting rid, sort of repelling the candidates you don't want and attracting the ones you do. So the ad is about attracting those people you want and helping those who look at it and don't like it to go away. That's good. And then this is the next filter. So I'm afraid most of this I have learned from Perry, you know, Perry's advertisements. I remember him saying, you know, you want it to be like almost their name is written on the ad and they go, oh, that's me. That is the product I need. You are talking exactly to me. It's exactly the same with your ad. When it comes to the application form, it's actually a very similar thing. You want the person to answer these questions thinking, this is exactly what I want to be spending my time doing. So when you've been through the first bit we talked about, which is identifying what you really want, the next step is to identify, how would I know this person can do this for me? Now, we have between 50 and 70 different criteria when we're going through this process of what we want this person to be able to achieve. And then we set about working out questions that they'll have to answer that will tell us that. Now, candidates have to do stuff where they're answering a question about what they've done in previous jobs or their current job that is kind of similar to what we're looking for. So if you're looking for a project manager, we want them to tell us about, you know, what's the most complicated project you've ever run? When did you last deliver late? What happened? Why did that happen? All that kind of stuff. It's really, it's not that clever when you think about it, but it does demand quite a bit of work. And I think that's where a lot of people don't put in enough effort, basically. But it is really important.
And Nancy, I think like this seems right, like an application form. You know, if you haven't seen what Nancy does, you're really in the dark here, because these application forms and the questions that she puts together really help to create a side-by-side comparison of the candidates coming through. And what's really interesting is to be able to look at those, and it's like, right, they either fade into the background or they jump off the page, because you can see who has the communication skills, you can see what matters to each person. And when these questions are done right, you know, what we found in doing this was that some people were like, oh my, you know, some candidates, right, they kind of balked at answering the questions. And like, well, if you're not willing to answer the questions, then why in the world would I be willing to give you a paycheck? And on the flip side, the people who went through this process and really invested some time in it, they were appreciative whether we hired them or not. They were appreciative that we took the time to identify what we were looking for and put together really good questions. And that spoke to them, that spoke highly of us as a company, and that we had our act together. And there are so many people out there in the workforce that are looking for the right people to associate with on a daily basis, right? We spend so much of our time at work, and they're looking for this place where they can call home. And even if they may not make as much money as where they might be able to somewhere else, if they feel a sense of connection, and putting a process like this in place, you know, especially coming from, you know, Perry's world, like right, of writing ads and this whole thing of, you know, tracking your conversion rates and, you know, all of your funnels, like this gives them so much of an indication of if they're in the right place or not. Just like a good Google ad with a good landing page and a good follow-up sequence tells them, hey, this product's a great fit. Well, the same thing happens here.
Yeah, it is exactly the same principle as you say, Brady. I mean, I actually found the feedback from one of the candidates that we had just last week. Hi, Charlie, I just wanted to send an email update that I finished the application. It was actually very fun. Even if I don't get the job, I just want to say that it was the best application for a job I've ever filled out. It was thorough and to the point. You can tell exactly what you guys are looking for, and I appreciated that. I've done applications that only barely scratch the surface of a potential employee. I just wanted to give you guys props for a well-crafted and thought-out application process. And that's actually a really junior job, funnily enough. But that candidate really liked it. We had a really similar email from someone applying for a really senior director level job in quite a big company recently, and just the same thing. He said that it showed that the company was really putting some effort in and really serious about it. And the questions showed they understood what was required in the role. So it does advertise you well, I think, when you do this. And
so Nancy, sorry, I was just going to say, but before we, you know, jump to the next piece here, there was a couple of things that you and I talked to when we talked a couple days ago, and I know Perry made mention of it at the beginning, and it's what I had, you know, a couple things I had shared on our AMN call a couple of weeks ago, and it was really two different things. Number one, I with my leadership team, I've got two other people on my kind of executive leadership team. Nancy helped me hire both of those people, and we took kind of a snapshot look back at the last 2 to 3 years, and we asked ourselves, what were the inflection points that really were levers where we really jumped to the next level? The number one thing we identified as the inflection points for us was our willingness to fire people. I think there were like 3 inflection points, and all 3 of them, and it's funny because the first one of those, we were in Roundtable in Chicago in a small group session. We had no idea what we were going to talk about, and 45 minutes later, we came out of it with the aha moment that, like, okay, we've got this one guy on our team that he's kind of creating a moat of his own. He's like putting everybody else off, and we made the decision that we knew we had to let him go. He had been great. He was our number one sales guy, but we knew we had to let him go, and we've had a couple more since then. But every inflection point came as a result of a move with people. And now to have our leadership team the way we have it, we've replaced some key elements along the way. I just can't stress enough to people how, you know, and if you're on this call, congratulations, because if you do any one thing, you know, hire carefully. Hire very carefully. Nothing will make your life more miserable than hiring the wrong person, and nothing, or not firing the wrong person. And number 2, nothing will make your life better than hiring the right people. And I get up every morning absolutely excited to go to work with these guys who are on my leadership team. We get so much done. We do it with so little effort, and we have a blast doing it. And yeah, we work our butts off, and our whole team does, but it really sets the tone. And, you know, you can have the greatest Google ads in the world and the greatest funnels and all of that stuff, but if you don't like the people you work with, and it's a grind, there is no better investment than you can make than how you hire people, how you choose who gets on your team, and then how to let them go. And it's funny, over the holidays, I've got 2 kids that are, well, out of high school now, and kind of in the workforce, in school. And we had a conversation on Christmas Day around the number one skill you need in your life is to learn when it's time to fire somebody. And whether that's an employer, an employee, a friend, a relative, whatever, like how crucial that is as an asset. And most people, and especially I found this in, a lot of the people in Perry's world, are conflict avoidant. And so there's this hesitation to pull back from that conflict of letting somebody go or moving on. And I just encourage people, like, look that right in the eye and take it head on, because that's what changes your life. And not only do you feel better about it yourself, but oftentimes you have, let somebody else move on as well and find greener pastures, because that energy exists there and it needs to be let go of.
Yeah, and when a person isn't in the right job, they're holding the company back and they're holding themselves back because they're not flourishing as they should be. And it is a really difficult decision. I will just tell you my favourite firing story though. I have to slot this one in. This is from years ago when I first started work, and I worked in a big factory, electronics factory, and there was a chap there. I won't give you his real name. We'll call him Fred, and he just was producing at like half the rate everyone else was. He just couldn't keep the pace up. They tried everything, and he was a really, really nice guy. So none of the managers wanted to fire him. And in the end, the HR director said, "Oh, you weaklings, I'll do it. I'll do it." So she went in to the interview room with the guy, and she told us afterwards. She sat down with him and she said, "Well, Fred, how do you think you're getting on?" And, "Well, it's all right, but I'm finding things a bit hard." And she said, "Do you feel we've given you all the training that we can?" He said, "Oh yes, everyone's been great. I've had loads of training." And she said, "Do you feel you've reached the levels that we need?" And he said, "Well, no, I've tried really hard, but I haven't managed to." And she said, "Well, I'm very sorry, but we're going to have to let you go." And he said, "Oh, well, do I have to stay till the end of the day, or can I go now?" And she said, "Oh, that's fine, you can go now. I've got all your money here, I've got all the forms and everything, so yeah, you can go now." And he said, "Oh, that's nice, because it's my birthday today." And poor old Joe. But the good end to the story is he went back to his old company, they gave him his old job back, and he was really happy. So just be a little bit careful when you're doing these things. But I think the sooner you do it, the better, obviously. And we've seen people who hang on to someone for ages, and then it's really unpleasant. But if someone just isn't the right person, you need to do something about it quickly. But having said that, sometimes actually these things can be solved if people get the right feedback and they've got the right goals and they get the right training. It's not always that you've got the wrong person, it's that they just haven't had the right support that they need. So you need to be careful on that. So let's look at application forms then, and how we actually sort for the people that we do need. So you've got to be really clear with the questions. They need to be identifying the key things you're looking for. What we often find is we have about 14 questions on our application form. I think that's probably enough, basically. And they're all based around what the person's actually got to do in the role and what they've done in previous similar roles or in jobs and so on. And what you'll find is there are 2 or 3 questions that will actually sort most of your candidates. And if they haven't passed those 2 or 3 questions, then actually they're just not the right people. And so what that means is if you get those questions right, you can then very quickly look through the application forms and identify, out of the 100 people you've got there, the 2 or 3, and I do mean 2 or 3, who actually are much closer to what you're looking for. Literally, we will get 100 application forms and 1 or 2 of them will pass.
Yeah, and Nancy, I was thinking about this before we jumped on. The number one challenge that I fought when we were working together was I had waited so long to hire somebody that I felt like I was in this place of desperation.
Yeah.
And it really put my mindset, almost behind the 8 ball, because I wanted so badly to get this person in and get working on stuff, and we had things to make happen. And it's a tough position. And I just recommend people, try to do it before you get desperate. It just works better.
Yeah, because when you're desperate, you do tend to start saying, "Oh yeah, well perhaps they'll be all right. Perhaps that problem won't happen. Oh yeah, we'll cope with this person." The difference between a really good hire and an average hire even can be massive. One of our clients, accountants, in fact, the chap I quoted earlier, the veterinarian accountant, they monitor people's performance in veterinary hospitals. And there is, between a good veterinary surgeon, and an average one, there's a difference of $100,000 revenue. Now, that's not the difference between a good one and a really bad one. That's just between a good one and an average one. So it is worth waiting another month to find your really good one, because they will pay that back really easily.
Yeah.
But of course, the other side is the cost of a really not right person. I mean, we talked about this, Brady, didn't we? And it can be,
oh my gosh,
horrendous.
Look, and the best hires we've made, we were willing to pay to get the top quality people. Now, they probably could have gotten, another 10,000, in salary somewhere else, but it was our culture that they wanted to be, and what we were doing that they wanted to be part of as well. But I know I was sitting in a roundtable meeting in Chicago one time, and Perry said, if you can pay 20 to 30% more, you are going to get the top talent. And that top talent very often is going to return 3 to 4 times, especially if they're in a leadership role, right? Maybe not so much in a production role, but if they're in a leadership role and they're working on strategy with you and they're working on processes and optimization, the top talent's going to get you 3 to 4x the results.
I think it's the same for a low-level role as well, Brady, quite honestly, because it's really easy when you're in a senior role to sort of downplay the skills of people further down the line. And I have seen that so often. So don't underestimate the value of getting a good person further down as well as a person at the top. And I started off my life in factories, and it's much easier to measure the output of a person in a factory than it is in many, many other roles. And when I did analysis, and this was before, computers and spreadsheets, I had to do it all by hand, on graph paper and stuff. And I was really shocked to see the difference between a top performer and a not top performer. My top performer didn't make any mistakes over a year, not a single rejected unit, compared to every other person in the department who had rejects every week. Not a single reject from her, and way above everyone else in output as well.
Nancy, we have absolute top performers in our quote unquote bottom-most roles, and they are fantastic.
Yeah, they make a huge difference, because until you've seen one of those, you don't realize. In fact, I think it's a real lesson sometimes to do the jobs of those people and just try them out for a couple of days and just see that actually they're a lot more skilled than you think they are. And you're not as good at them as they are. And you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be hiring people who can only do those jobs as well as you. You should be hiring people who can do them much better than you can, in my view. I mean, I know when Charlie's on
Nancy,
holiday.
I think it's really interesting. I think one of the last people you hired for me, this guy, he doesn't even have a college degree. And we just promoted him last week to Chief Strategy Officer.
Wow.
And I mean, he was like a diamond in the rough, right? He was homeschooled. He was, I mean, all of these odd things he had worked for, you know, a company that was really, really regimented in their processes and really worked on like net promoter scores and getting good feedback and establishing great processes. And he has come in and, I mean, basically transformed the operations of our entire company. And
what was he actually employed to do, Brady?
He was business development. And then we took him and we put him in our customer success, and now he's actually in charge of customer success, customer support, and he's in charge of sales.
Fantastic. Yeah, good to know. I think that's really the key thing. It's worth being really clear what you need, and then when people have got potential, yeah, give them the chance to make.
And he was spotted because he filled out the application form, and we looked at what he said. You know, and he was actually able to back up what he did with examples, and that was the key, right? He was able to back it up with specific examples, and you're like, okay, there's no way that somebody could say they do this, and you know, he's showing examples like, you know, he did it. He wasn't making it up, and it wasn't somebody else's job he was describing.
Well, that brings us on to our next and last section, which is questions. Now, what I've done here is I have this thing about really poor questions that are asked in interviews and what a complete waste of everyone's time they are. So I just went onto the net. I just searched for great interview questions. And these are questions that people think are really good interview questions. And I thought we'd just go through a few of these and see well, I know what I think about them. We'll see what we think. So the first one here, tell me about yourself. Have you ever used that one, Brady?
I'm sure I have, Nancy, and like, you know, I fired myself from interviewing because I really am not good at it.
And I think that's the mark of a really self-aware person. If it's something you're not good at, well, don't do it. Get someone else who is good at it to do it. That's really crucial, isn't it?
I mean, I'll be in the interview, but I just sit there and let the other people who are better at it do the talking, and I'll just observe, because I get more from observing than talking.
So this question, it's a great question at a cocktail party or a dinner party, but the key thing is, what value is this question? What is it going to tell you about the person that pertains to whether they can do the job or not? If you're looking for someone who's going to be a chat show guest or something, well, fine, but most of us aren't looking for that person. So that is absolutely not focused enough. Now, this next one, what do you want, or why do you want this job, kind of looks like it might be quite a good question, doesn't it? But has anyone got any ideas why they think this might not be a very good question? Brady?
Well, I mean, you know, I think there's no direction of it. Like, it could go any which way, and you know, like, you don't need a bunch of emotional stories from people. I don't know. I mean, you're the expert.
I'll tell you what I think. I'll tell you what I think on this. Now, we all know, I think a lot of you might know Perry, I hope you won't mind me sharing this secret, but Perry was fired from, I think it's 5 jobs, is that right, Perry? 5? Well, Brian, you can confirm that. It's around that number.
At least.
I think, sorry? At least, we're saying, Brian. Now, I think the reason is because Perry is probably really good at being interviewed. He's engaging, he's interesting, he can talk about all sorts of things, but that doesn't actually make him good at those jobs. And I think he's quite happy to agree that, you know, he wasn't in the right job. But he's probably able to.
Perry could talk himself into any job.
Exactly.
Right? Perry could talk himself into any job.
Yeah. And this is the kind of question that gives someone like Perry and lots of other people who are good at marketing, who are really optimistic and stuff, it gives them a license just to sort of butter you up. Oh, Brady, because I've admired your career, I've followed you on LinkedIn, I think you're a fantastic person, I really, really want to work with you, I could learn so much from you. Brady's going, oh yes, this is the kind of person we want here. Well, no, I know you're too smart to fall for that one, but you're going to get all sorts of just marketing answers to this. So unless you're hiring someone for the ability to do that, do not ask that question. Now, why should we hire you falls into a very similar category. But it also is that kind of question where you're sort of asking a person to tell you about their, their skills and so on. Now, the trouble is most people just are not good at doing that. Either if they're, I'm going to stereotype here, if they're kind of English, they're going to downplay things. I suspect it might be the opposite for some other people, where they just tell you they're absolutely great. You are not going to get accurate, useful information that tells you whether they meet your criteria from that question. Now then there's, this might be actually one of my favorites. What is your greatest weakness?
That's a great one.
Yeah, that one's going to get you the truth every time, right? Like,
oh,
come
absolutely.
on.
I'm just so committed. I just throw myself so hard into my work just to achieve, and people tell me, hey, pull back, man, you're working too hard, and I'm just so committed.
Exactly. When I used to train people on how to answer or how to do interviews, I'd get them to list out their worst questions that they were most worried about, and this was one of them. So we'd think out what would the answers be to this, and you look at the company and say, well, my greatest weakness, I'm too ambitious, if it was the kind of company that liked people who are ambitious. Or if you felt you could do it, say, well, it's chocolate. That would be mine, to be perfectly honest. But it's really not a useful question, because you're not going to get any useful information. Now, here's a new one that I came across. What is your favorite memory from childhood? I hadn't seen that one before. I haven't the slightest idea why someone thinks that's going to be useful. I really can't.
Next.
So here, this is a really difficult one. What can you do for us that other candidates can't? How can a candidate know that? They don't know who the other candidates are. It's just completely ridiculous, and it's asking a candidate just to sort of blow their own trumpet in a way that is implausible and it's not going to give you any honest information. And then we've got the animal or biscuit thing. If you were an animal or a biscuit, what type of animal or biscuit would you be? I couldn't believe it when this started to become popular.
Well, I think Nancy, at some point, people are trying to put a little bit of humor or entertainment into a boring process. So I don't know, but so I think, because you're just about ready to wrap this up, right?
Yeah, we'll wrap up very
You're
shortly.
getting close. Okay, so I wanted to share with the audience. There's a couple of books that really spawned my interest and understanding of how crucial people are to an organization and to growth. And some of you in the watching probably have already come across these books, but I know when before I was I thought I knew a whole bunch of stuff, and then I read these books and I realized after I read these books that I knew less. And it was really what propelled me to go talk to Nancy. The first book was a book called Traction. And it's by Gino Wickman. And
we can
then
put this in the chat, can we, Brian?
Yeah, Traction by Gino Wickman. And then he had a second book, which was called Rocket Fuel. And when I read this Rocket Fuel book, I think it was like 2 days after I read this Rocket Fuel book, I talked to Nancy, and I told Nancy, I'm like, Nancy, you have to read this book. And Nancy grabbed the book, and that was when I engaged Nancy to hire, kind of what would the role that has become my COO. That was the role. The first person actually Nancy replaced after 11 months, because she left and went back to work with the company before. And so those are two really good books by Gino Wickman. The second one, the other book that I read was a book called Scaling Up, and that's by Vern Harnish. And that book, and I actually just did my whole leadership team did a workshop with them in December, and that like they said at the beginning of it, look, 80% of your problems go away with the right people. It's really that simple. 80% of your problems go away with the right people. And so there isn't an investment that you can make if you've got a product that's got some traction, no pun intended with the book, but that's the idea, right? If you've got traction or you have something that you can scale up, read those books, understand the value of people and how crucial hiring is. And then all of a sudden you look at the cost of hiring as an investment in the long term, not as a, oh, well, heck, I can put an ad up on Indeed and, you know, for $500 worth of advertising, get a whole bunch of people. And like, no, it's not that simple. I mean, it is that simple to get a, you know, to kind of, you know, it's like playing roulette. I mean, I guess you might get, you know, be able to pick red or black, or, but you're probably not going to get the right number. And what you need is you need a process. And when I worked with Nancy, what I came away with was a process. Not only did I get good people, but I got insight into how does a professional actually architect a process to create proven results. And that's really what you're after, right? Proven results to find great people. And Nancy's skill set, how she asks questions, how she asks questions of me to tease out the right job description, how we communicate the company culture, how we formulate the questions that need to be on the application form. Those are the pieces that are crucial to a bulletproof process. And if you've got one, awesome. If you don't, that may be why you're watching today. And it would, you know, make some sense for you to at least have a conversation with Nancy. And I can tell you that, you know, she's my go-to. I'm sure there's other resources out there, but I can tell you the best business building minds in the world will second on the idea that people are your number one asset. It's worth the investment.
I tell you one thing I remember from when we first started working with you, Brady, which I think really rings true for a lot of people, is you said you'd hired 2 people so far, or at the beginning, and one person was great, the first person you hired, and then you hired another one, and that wasn't good, but you thought you were really good because the first one was great. So, you know, yep, that was fine. And then you realized that actually that was kind of more like a lucky accident. And I think
the first one stayed for 5 years, and the other one, like, we wish we would have cut, you know, let them go after like 5 days.
Yeah, and it's easy, and I've done it. I've also hired really bad people. That's why I designed the process, and we keep tweaking it and keep improving it, because once you've got a process, as you know, in your business, it's exactly the same as a funnel, you know, marketing funnel. You can just keep tweaking and tweaking because you know what's in the process, and it's just a funnel like any other, really, what we're doing, and we just keep tweaking and tweaking and improving it and sort of making it better, really. But yeah, do get in touch if you'd like to have a chat. That's absolutely fine. We're very happy to talk to anyone, even if you've just got you know, a few questions you want to ask. Absolutely fine. So let's just have a quick summary of what we've covered, which is just sort of scratching the surface, but I hope it's given you some useful things. So the first thing is be really clear on what it is that you need, and make sure you're focusing on what you need in a year's time, not on what you're looking at today or last week. Write your ad carefully, look at the policies, have other options, don't just stick with one job board. Don't use resumes for filtering candidates because it's really time consuming and it's actually not very effective. Use an application form, get your candidates to fill that in. You will find if you do that, at least half your candidates won't fill it in. Don't worry, they were not the people you wanted. It's usually more like 25% that fill it in, or actually less. And then make sure that the questions you ask people, whether they're on the application form or in an interview of any sort, give you the information you need for making the decision. Because the key thing Brady and I have been talking about today is you need to make the right decision. And unless you've got the right information for making that decision, it's going to be really hard, or you're going to make the wrong decision. And I would say lastly, I don't think there is 100% solution to this. I think it would be lovely to say, yeah, 100% you can do it and it'll be right every single time, because you're dealing with people. 90% is about what we get. Obviously, I'm always working to improve on that. But if you're getting about 90% right, so that means 90% of the people you hire stay for at least a year and do a really good job in that time. That's pretty good. Most people, do you know what most people get, Brady? Success rate, average?
50?
25.
25. I don't like, no, and I think, you know, what the other part that a lot of people probably, right, it's like your company begins to take on a life of its own, and it can't take on a life of its own if it's always swapping out parts and pieces, and those pieces are the people. And so the investment to get the right core, then all of a sudden, like, look, if you're doing things right in business, the further the further down the path you get, the more you're going to have organic recruiting. You're going to have people wanting to come work for you rather than you having to go look for them. And that's where you want to be. And it starts with getting the right core group of people together so you can start that momentum working for you instead of against you.
Well, I think that summarizes everything. Any questions, Brian? Anything you want to add, or Perry?
If you have time for a couple more questions. Anyway, let me pick out a couple of items. Nancy, do you follow the same process for hiring, quote unquote, hiring an intern? Qualify them using your process for a trial period to learn, then move to a paid position? I've gone through 5 interns already over 2 years, and it just has burned me out.
Sorry, I missed the end of that question, Brian. I thought.
Just saying, I've gone through 5 interns already in over 2 years, and it has just burned me out.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, no, I would absolutely follow that process. In fact, this is a really good point, because people quite often think, well, there's no point in putting a lot of money into a process for like really low level people, interns and all that sort of thing. But actually, what would it be like if you had a really, really good intern? What value would that add? So absolutely, I would use the same process. Yeah, very much so. I mean, it may be there's some pretty simple things you could do to make improvements. We helped one of our clients who was hiring trainees to learn acupuncture, and we managed to work out some really straightforward ways that he could just weed out the people who weren't going to make it, and which saved him a lot of time and effort training them, of course. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and Brian, if I could put in my 2 cents on interns, I would recommend people try to get rid of the word intern, because if you're bringing them in to work for you, then you need to be just as diligent about who it is you're introducing to the culture and what the expectations are as someone you're bringing onto your leadership team. And so if intern is just another word for I want to pay you less, like it's really, it can end up becoming something of a crutch. And you know, either you need somebody or you don't. If you do, then go find, you know, be willing to go invest and find the right person. And you know, they don't really care if it's what label you put on it. You could post a job for an intern and post one for not, but use a process like this so you get the right people.
Absolutely. And that's true whether you're hiring locally, whether you're hiring nationally within your own country, or whether you're hiring overseas, which we have done all of the above, and the process is absolutely essential to what we do. Good. Nancy, I think we are at the place to wrap up.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
This has been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank Planet Perry members for sitting in. Again, reach out to Nancy at vinehouse.co.uk, or follow the links that have been provided here in the on the screen. A replay will be available within a couple of days. So thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Brady. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for coming, everyone. Hope that was useful to you. And just get in touch if you've got any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them.
Excellent. All righty. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Great job, Nancy. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.